On this episode of the show, I have with me Russ Fradin. He is the CEO and co-founder at Larridn. We're going to be talking about his background and journey as a founder. He's actually been a founder for over 27 plus. We're going to maybe have that. Russ clarify that, but
almost 30 years.
Yeah, almost 30. A lot of different ventures, and we're going to tap into that background, tap into that experience. And he said something interesting to me about sometimes you might fail, but the journey is as valuable. We're going to ask him what that means, and representing other people's money, not losing that investment. Huge component of being a serial entrepreneur, working with the right co-founders, and going to touch on a few other things if we can. Russ, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for reaching out. This is cool.
Absolutely. All right. So before we start, can you tell us what your current company does?
Sure. My partner Jim and I have worked together for a very long time, and got together last summer and started really thinking about how we can leverage our experience selling to the enterprise and building measurement companies and things like that in the past in a world of AI. And so we're building Larridn focused on, the way I think about the world is the future of work is certainly humans working alongside AI agents in some capacity. There'll be some things better suited for AI to do on their own, some things people will do without any support, but a lot of it will just be people working together. So I think you really have to rethink how companies measure productivity overall. Measuring employee productivity has always been a challenge for companies. There's a bunch of survey vendors in the space that do a mediocre job going back 40 or 50 years. And in this new AI world, we've tried to reimagine what does it look like to understand what tools people are using, how can they use them more effectively, how can we collectively learn. And so, where are my AI investments paying off? Where are the best practices for my people that I can reinvest in my people to help them learn how to work with these wonderful tools? So you're seeing this again and again across the world. For a long time, I think a good way to think about this is, for a long time, if you think about it, HR and IT were very, very separate, right? There was, the people that worked at your company, and then there were the tools they used. But the tools they used were, Microsoft Outlook and Word and things like that. They're very separate. And what you see with agents is really a blurring of the lines between what's done by people and what's done by, not people, right? What's done by AI. And you're seeing, I think just yesterday, so since you and I first met, Amir, I think just yesterday, Moderna announced that they were combining the role of the CTO and the head of HR. And I think that would have sounded insane a couple years ago. But if you think about this, we're going to have this new world where you think about people and technology working in partnership. And so we wanted to reimagine, what does HR look like in that world? How do I understand employees, employee productivity, what tools they're using, tool productivity? By the way, where am I wasting money in AI tools? And so we're building a whole suite of services at Larridn there.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, it is interesting. Anyways, that'd be a whole different podcast to talk about how technology will allow, with agentic AI, for people to actually cross over into other roles. I think that's going to be maybe that'll be one we have to cover. Actually, this episode we're going to talk about your experience as a founder.
Sure.
And maybe, to start off, I mentioned you have been a founder multiple times. And I'll let you kind of give a little background into that. I think when we first spoke, I'd written down for you, went back and clarified it's 27 to 30 rounds of venture capital.
Yeah, I've raised, luckily over a long period of time. But so I was very fortunate. There's a lot of good fortune comes from being born in the right year. And so it just so happened that while I was an undergrad, I met a guy who, frankly, I didn't know if his idea was any good, but it seemed like a cool opportunity. And so I accidentally became one of the first employees at the first online ad network back in, 1996. So 29 years ago, and moved to Silicon Valley. And that was very early. I think when I joined that company, Netscape hadn't even gone public yet. So it didn't seem like it was going to be particularly lucrative. It just seemed really interesting and exciting thing to do as a 19-year-old. And now I am almost 50, and it's turned out to be a great time. Moving to Silicon Valley in 1986 turned out to, in hindsight, be a fantastic thing. And, like I said, a lot of good fortune in the year I happened to have been born. And I have been really either kind of the first employee or the founder of tons of companies over the last 29 years, and invested in a lot of things and been on a bunch of public boards and private boards as well.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you a question. I mean, you've been in the startup space a long time. You've been a founder a long time. If you were to look back, you mentioned starting even before Netscape was public. If you were to look back at what it meant or what it means to be an entrepreneur during that generation versus now, what have you seen change? As I'm sure you see some other founders or first-time founders, but what has changed in that?
I don't think anything's really changed for the great founders. I think some stuff has changed probably for the mediocre founders, but I don't think anything's changed for the great founders. I think, starting a technology company, starting any company is on average insane, right? It's on average ridiculous to think that just a handful of, men and women with some random idea and no particular access to capital, no particular customers, no particular connections are going to do something that, I don't know, what's the Steve Jobs line, that, dents the universe in some small or large way, right? Like, obviously that's objectively an insane thing to think and not a great way to, make money or achieve any particular professional success on average, right? And so I think all of the people that were building technology companies in the 90s or the early 2000s or now who've built truly great companies really had something in common, which is they just wanted to work with amazing people trying to build something that they thought needed to exist in the world. And, some very small percentage of time that works out in an amazing way and it's become quite profound. I really think what's happened over the last 20 years, and I don't say this in any bad way, is I think in the 90s, the bar to start a company was very high because, in all honesty, the idea that it would work seemed far-fetched. As the successes became more celebrated, number one, number two, as venture became, more popular, larger, more mainstream, with the introduction of services like AWS that just made starting a company much cheaper. It became very popular, become a coder, right? Google became a giant company in the world. Facebook became a giant company in the world. So I think the idea that this was a career path became, something that you wouldn't have thought of in the 90s, right? It was highly unusual in 95, 94, 95, 96, 97. It was highly unusual if you went to a, good university to make the decision to become a, Silicon Valley early stage employee versus going to work at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. That's not unusual these days, right? No one would think it was weird if a 19-year-old went to work at Google or Facebook or actually went to work in Y Combinator. So a ton of scaffolding is built up around the industry. But I think the great founders that I've met from the 90s or today are very, very similar. I think the difference now is, it kind of seems like a potential viable career path. And so I think the bar to start a company is much lower, which is wonderful. I don't say that in any bad way. It's wonderful that these companies exist, and some small percent of the time they become amazing and change the world. And, look at this platform you and I are using today, or the amount of time we spend using AI apps or living inside Google or living inside Facebook, or frankly, on the enterprise side, Salesforce or ServiceNow. These are amazing, wonderful companies that have mostly been built by a very small group of people with a, singular vision that every one of these companies has a history where they almost failed, more times than you can count. And, yet they succeeded thanks in large part to the drive of the early team and the, success.
Do you think, and I guess, you'd have a good perspective. Has entrepreneurship become, I don't want to use the word glorified, but has it become, actually I'll use the word glorified. Has it become glorified to be an entrepreneur, be a founder? I mean, we heard so many stories. We've seen so many stories, obviously, about some, amazing founders. They're, everyone knows who they are. Has that shifted things? Have you seen any impact because of that? Because obviously, going back, that was a little bit less common in 1986, 1990. There were some names, but not like now.
But also, look, partially it was just harder, right? I mean, pre-internet, it was just harder. I don't know. I actually couldn't tell you if it's become more glorified, right? I don't have a great perspective on, if I had been almost 50 years old in the mid 80s. Like, certainly there have been lots of points in American history where we've glorified the successful, small businessman or woman who started a company and built that company, with their bare hands. Like, I think certainly there's a big thing about America and celebrating, the success of people building businesses. So look, obviously, the size of business you can build thanks to the internet is just much larger, right? But I'm not sure that, I'm not sure that the person that built the very successful business in his small town is less celebrated kind of on a per capita basis, was less celebrated than the person that builds an amazing internet business today, just because of the internet scale and the fact that we have global distribution. Like, in the old days, that person might have made $20 million. And in today's world, because of the kind of, size of businesses that you can build, that person will make $20 billion. And so, by definition, be more famous. But I think there's something, I think kind of American or, the Western world's kind of celebration of people that do something new and unique and become successful is, been true. I mean, I'm sure there's overdoing it, of course. And of course, anytime you have these kinds of giant successes, you will also have some amount of fraud and some amount of nonsense, some amount of bad behavior. Of course, I'm not hand waving that. And the, people that commit fraud should go to jail, and the people that are bad actors should be mocked and shamed. But fundamentally, I think there's something very kind of, I don't want to say American. You see it in China, and you see it in Western Europe as well, but mostly in America, at least so far. And I think we've kind of always celebrated people that built something, and probably overly celebrated the myth that there was just one person behind that. Right? There's probably a bit of myth making to that. But by the way, as there is with lots of other forms of success.
Absolutely. If you're a founder for as long as you've been, obviously, I like the line. Sometimes you might fail, but the journey is as valuable. I mean, you must live and breathe that to keep at it for as long as you have. Because
I said this to I've said this many times. So I was a company I started many years ago. We had the good fortune that our first idea was the right idea. I had a great team, and 2 years later we sold it for lots of money, and it was all wonderful. And man, it was easy. And then I started another company, and that company took around 9 years. Actually sold it for a little bit more money. And so everybody made money. It was fantastic. But I remember at the time thinking, about 7.5 years in, we'd been at it for a while, and it was doing okay, but it wasn't really clear to me how it was going to turn out. And I remember thinking at some point, I have the greatest job in the world. I get to go to work every day with people I truly like, trying to build something amazing. We have customers that like us, right? Fundamentally. And I just don't think there's anything better you can do with your time from a fulfillment standpoint. There might be things more societally beneficial, of course. But to me, I don't think there's anything better you can do with your time than go to work every day with amazing partners trying to do something that changes the world in some small way or some large way, right? And so, fundamentally, I remember at some point thinking of that company that if it had failed after 9 years, 8.5 of the years were still fantastic. Like, sure, nothing is fun when they fail. And I've been involved in some things that didn't work, and some things that worked spectacularly well, and some things that worked, modestly well. And what I have to say is, when you're surrounded by amazing people and you get to go to work every day doing something fantastic, that's wonderful. There's just kind of no better feeling. So sure, of course, when you sell the company for a little money, it's great. And when you sell it for more money, it's even better. And sure, there's a monetary aspect to this. There's also a fulfillment aspect too. Like, I remember, a person that I had known for years who took an early bet on joining one of my first startups, was a guy a little older than me. I remember after we sold the company, he was able to buy his first house. And so there's an element of you're not just, obviously, people are generally happy when they make money for themselves. That's fantastic. But I remember how great I felt about the money others had made by, helping me on our, journey. So all of that is fantastic. But at the end of the day, I mean, look, I'm in the office right now with this wonderful white wall behind me, though you can see our logo up there. To me, there's just nothing better that you can do with time you spend away from your family than going to work and trying to build something amazing with amazing people.
I love that. But I guess the amazing people part, let's kind of focus on that for a second, because you mentioned finding the right co-founders. And obviously you had the good fortune of surrounding yourself with the right people. I guess can you help articulate what, I guess, for your experience, what right meant? What was right that kind of clicked for you with the co-founders that you'd work with?
So I've been super lucky. The small number of times in my career I've had a boss, they were all fantastic, wonderful mentors, and really helped me grow in my career. And then I was very fortunate to have I actually for a long time had two co-founders. One I don't work with today, not for any bad reason. He's amazing, and I'm an investor and board member of his company. He just started a company a couple of years ago while I was helping, working on something else and otherwise busy. But I have a co-founder. I for many, many years had a co-founder who I worked with for, I think, 24 straight years. And then he and I also had another partner we had worked with for 20 years, who I actually continue to work with today. So I guess he is now overtaken. So I've just been very fortunate to have these people I met early in my career who were amazing and impressive and had a complementary skill set. And, they liked what I could do and I liked what they could do. And frankly, just get a lot of energy going to work with them. And then I think if you can hire people, it's not an original thing to say. Many people have said it. I think it's a Vinod Khosla line, but your first 20 people really do set the stage and the culture for the company you're going to build. And so I think if you're fortunate to have people you love working with and a high bar for the first 10 or 20 people you hire, you have a fighting shot at building an amazing company. And fundamentally, by the way, I think about it this way: as I've gotten older and relatively more successful, I think a decent way to think about it is I have a wife I like a lot. I have 3 great kids. And so my bar to leave my house is very, very high. And so if I'm going to leave my house to go to work every day with people, I want to make sure they're amazing people. I want to make sure it's a problem I want to work on. And, I think people, if you're lucky enough to have options, you hopefully will also have a high bar with the investors you'll work with and the board members you'll surround yourself with. And, that it's one of those kind of success either in your career or in your company makes it easier to have options to work with great investors. But, getting to work with amazing people and amazing investors is, to me, the best thing about being a founder. Also, you get to choose where the office is. There's a lot of ways to make money, but when you're the founder, you get to choose where the actual office is within reason. And, it's kind of a nice perk.
Super. I just a follow up to that question, because I think sometimes when you look at someone who goes through multiple processes of ideation, going through the process of establishing a business, obviously you've had some founders that you've relied on along the way. You're a guy that probably has lots of ideas. I'm sure lots of ideas, lots of problems you could solve. How do you know when it's the right idea to go, this is the one we're tackling? What's your process like? Because I've asked this question of other people, and it's interesting to hear.
I don't think I have a great framework for it. I mean, there's some intersection between an idea you have and an idea that you think you're uniquely qualified to work on. So if I think about Larridn today, will we succeed? I don't know. It's the odds of any given company succeeding are not super high. And, we've done this before, which helps. It helps in raising money, and it helps in hiring great people, and it helps in knowing customers. So I think our odds of success, the more you've, had success kind of build, that's great, but still the odds are low. As I think about this, my co-founder Jim and I, and with some other partners and a co-founder we hired along the way, but my co-founder Jim and I met many, many, many years ago at a company called ComScore, where we were both there before ComScore had any revenue. And ComScore is probably the most successful measurement company that's been built this century, right? Probably, and maybe there's another, but whatever. It became a very successful company for a very long time. And Jim and I met there and really kind of saw what it takes to build an industry standard third-party measurement company with a lot of credibility. Then, I built some other companies along the way. Jim and I built a very large company called Dynamic Signal together, where we sold kind of lots of very expensive enterprise-grade software to heads of HR and heads of marketing, but mostly heads of HR at the largest companies in the world. I think we sold something like 35 million seats of software to 600 or 700 of the Fortune 2000. So it was all big enterprise software sold to lots of people that touched lots of employees. And so as we thought about kind of what are we uniquely good at, yes, I have ideas in other categories, but part of it gets to the point of I want to work in areas where I think I have some unfair advantage because the odds of success are so low anyway. And we realize we're uniquely good at, those kind of areas of work and tried to start a company around those areas. So, the fact that I might have other good ideas in other categories, like, great, that's wonderful. I think, look, people have said this, ideas are a dime a dozen. There's a million ideas. And the truth is, the odds that your idea, when you start the company, it's going to be your long-term idea is absurd anyway, right? You're going to change it and model it, and it will evolve a million times over a million generations. There's no way the founders of Google 30 years ago had any concept that they would be the leading self-driving car company in the world, right? Facebook very famously, when they were raising their first round, flat out told investors they were never going to let anyone who wasn't a current college student on their platform. There's no way they thought they'd be building, meta glasses and AI robots and, own the, most popular chat application in the world. Like, of course, these things evolve. So I think people overuse pivot as if you go like, well, I had this idea, now I have this different idea. All of these companies evolve. The best ones evolve the fastest and the strongest, but all of these companies evolve. So it's really more kind of what's the general direction I'm going to sail in, and then do I have the team to tack along the way?
I love that. And again, I was going to maybe tie two things together. One, you'd mentioned obviously you're representing other people's money, and obviously within that you're getting people that are investing in you, a concept, a direction. You also mentioned, obviously you talked about a few companies that have pivoted, and pivoting is part of the process. How do you marry the two together? Because obviously that's sometimes tricky.
I actually don't think it is. I mean, as I said, I don't even look. There are some famous pivots, right? I think Slack was a gaming company that became what it is today, an enterprise chat application. So I think there are a handful of examples of, we had this idea, we literally threw it out and built something totally different. I think Groupon did that, if I remember correctly. So there's a handful of that. I think pivot's a weird word because it's this catch-all term that almost doesn't mean anything. When you run a business, your business will evolve. All of the time, the most successful businesses, the least successful businesses, all of them will evolve. And we all know the history of, what was, the foundation of these businesses that are 200 or 300 years old. So I don't really think that's an interesting concept. The way I think about this is, when you raise money at an early stage, and by the way, I've probably invested in, I'd have to add it up, but 70 to 100 companies just as an angel investor over the last 16 or 17 years. I think when you invest in a company in the early days, you're investing in a team, you're investing in a broad space. Can they articulate an idea? Can they articulate a vision? Do I feel great about that team? Will they turn out to be right? Hopefully, right? I mean, there's a lot of hope in investing, right? Hopefully this team will turn out to be as good as I think they are, and this category will evolve the way I think it will. But really what I'm saying is, I'm trusting these people to leverage their judgment and work very, very hard, running toward this very unlikely summit that they're trying to scale. And some wonderful percent of the time, it turns out you bet on the right people and the right space, and they had enough money and enough resources. And, when that kind of good judgment and great people and great intelligence and hard work combines with great luck, wonderful. You have some of the best companies in the world. And so I think it's very silly to talk about, they got lucky. Like, yeah, sure, everything that's successful got lucky, of course. But the way you're going to take advantage of that is working very, very hard with other great people. And so, my general perspective as an angel investor, some aspect of writing angel checks is people will call you and they will let you know that the thing you invested X tens or however much money in has failed, and you'll be getting back somewhere between zero and, not much money. And my general perspective from watching people along the way, no one's ever excited about it, of course. My general perspective is, when you're an investor, in the early stage, by the way, we're not talking about growth rounds. That's a very different kind of math. And they're kind of pivoting or evolving is very, very different. But when you're an investor in something in the early stage, my general perspective is, I'll say to the founder, did you steal any of the money? No. Did you work very, very, very hard? Yes. Great. Then we really have nothing to complain about. And oftentimes I'll back those people again, because I think in general, when you're doing something in the early stage, there's this cognitive dissonance in Silicon Valley of on the one hand, there is a chance that this will be a 60,000x return. I think Google was something like a 60,000x return, but likely it will be a zero. And how do I leverage my judgment and my people and my network to, minimize the chance it's a zero and maximize the chance it's, many, many, tens of X, hundreds of X return. And so, hopefully over time you have better judgment and better people and better networks and all of that. But at the end of the day, there's an inherent insanity in betting on two people and a random idea. And so I think anyone who does that understands that as long as these people are going to work very, very, very hard pursuing the idea or learning and, evolving, you can't really be angry about it. I mean, sometimes it will fail and you will learn from that, but you can't be particularly angry about it.
That makes a lot of sense. That's actually very well stated. I love your views on that. I was going to ask you about angel investing. I mean, that's a lot of companies to invest in, and obviously, you have the right mindset. Obviously you yourself have raised lots of rounds of venture capital, a couple $1 billion. When you look at founders I want to ask a complicated question, but do you look at yourself when you look at other founders? Because obviously you've gone through it, or do you try to keep it, very much separated as, hey, this founder can't rely on your background experience? I mean, it's hard not to, but obviously, how separated do you keep those two different lenses?
I don't know. I mean, it's probably an interesting challenge for anyone, and I can't claim to be particularly amazing at it. There are people that are much more, much better angel investors than I am and been much more historically successful. And they probably have something smarter and more profound to say. I think my general perspective is you don't want to lie to yourself about you don't want to get excited about the idea and what you would do if you were the founder of that company, because you're not the founder of the company, that someone else is. And so I try to invest in things where I think the people are amazing. I have some proprietary access or some proprietary knowledge. And hopefully I'm meeting a founder who I think is smarter and better than me and, will be much more successful than me. And I think ideally you want to meet a founder who, is going to be amazing and change the world. And you're very fortunate they would even allow you to be a small part of their journey, and you're there to help them if they need help along the way. I think, for maybe a quarter of the companies I've invested in, I've helped them a ton and they've needed a bunch of help. And, maybe a quarter of the companies I've invested in, they need my help occasionally. And probably half the time they, they think they'll need a bunch of help on the front end and they don't. And that's fine. All of those, my general perspective is my job is to, invest in these companies and then help them as much as they need and be available as much as possible. But also in Silicon Valley, when you're an angel investor, oftentimes, first of all, there's other angels around who might be more helpful in that category. There's VCs around who might be helpful. So there's a lot of people around these companies. And I think you want to walk the line of being very available and very supportive, but not a pain in the ass. And I think that's different than if you're a VC where it's really your job to be a board member, right? When I've been a board member, I have a different approach, right? But I think obviously it's very dangerous to say this idea is amazing. Oh my God, I would be amazing if I were the CEO of this company, because I'm not going to. If I invest in some company tomorrow, great. I still spend 99% of my non-family time working on Larridn, not working on other random things. And so it kind of doesn't matter if I would be a good CEO of your idea. The question is, would you be a good CEO of your idea? And by the way, I will say the companies that I've been fortunate enough to invest in that turned out to be very successful, like every single time those founders turned out to be better founders than I was in my companies and better CEOs than I've been in my companies. And that's amazing. And I'm very fortunate that I was, a very small part of the journey.
Absolutely. I love it. Russ, I know you got to get back to actually running the business as well. And I appreciate you sharing time with us and your experiences as a founder, as an angel investor. If somebody is going to want to ask a follow-up question, I might have missed something here. What's a good way of connecting with you?
Probably LinkedIn, Twitter. I don't know. I do love Twitter. Twitter's probably my number one hobby other than running. Twitter's the best. But between LinkedIn and Twitter, I'm not that hard to get a hold of.
Nice. Out of curiosity, your hobby as a runner, does that help you clear your mind? I love running as well, so I was just kind of curious what you gained.
It started out of pure necessity, actually, when I moved to Silicon Valley So I started a startup in May of 96, but I moved to Silicon Valley in May of 97. And when I moved to Silicon Valley, when I was 20 years old, I weighed 300 pounds. And so the first year I lived in Silicon Valley, I lost 100 pounds, mostly from running and eating less. It's I mean, it's hard, but it's not complicated. And so I just really got into running. I've done a bunch of triathlons along the years. And so part of it is I like eating food, so I run a lot. And the more food I want to eat, the more I want to run. And I've done a bunch of marathons and a bunch of triathlons over the years. But yeah, it's really become my only hobby. It's a super time efficient hobby. And I don't know, I'm a huge fan. I do think you get to spend some amount of time with yourself. I used to run a lot with friends. I used to run a lot with my wife, but then as we had kids, it's way too hard. So now I just run on my own, and it's kind of my time. I get to either run thinking about work, thinking about nothing, listening to podcasts, whatever it is. So I don't know. Running's the best. I'm a huge running fan.
Awesome. Yeah, I that resonates. That's what I use it for as well. A, to be able to indulge in more food, and B, not to think for about how long the run is.
The meal you eat after the marathon makes the marathon. No one likes running a marathon, but the meal after the marathon is amazing.
It is. That is very true. Well, I do appreciate it. Thank you for being on. Thank you for sharing with us.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Russ walked us through his experience, obviously told us a little bit about the current company, Larridn, and then obviously walked us through his background as a founder, his experiences, how he views the journey, representing other people's money, co-founders, a little bit of angel investing as well. Please share this episode with somebody else. I thought it was a fantastic show, and I'd appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.